morning, everyone. Can we confirm that the broadcast has started? Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Councillor Mike Quigley, Chairman of the Planning and Rights of Way Committee, and I would like to welcome you all to this meeting, which is both taking place here in the Council Chamber and being broadcast live on YouTube. First of all, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Meakin, and there's no substitute being sent. That's under the category of other reasons. We've also had two other apologies for other reasons. That's from Councillor Paul Henshaw, and Councillor Pauline Allen is attending, and from Councillor Nigel Moxon and Councillor Richard Butler is attending as substitute. Thank you.
Just for the record, Andy Meakin was due to come, but his mother's been taken suddenly ill. So that's the reason.
Thank you for that. Do we have any declarations on the agenda from any members or officers? Members first, any declarations of interest? No? Officers, any? No? Declarations of lobbying? I don't know of any. Does any member any declaration of lobbying to make? No? Minutes of the last meeting held on the 19th of September, included as item 4. Can we all agree that those are a true and accurate record of what took place? All in favour? That is clearly carried. So we move on to the substantive item, which is the John Brook Sawmill, which is item 5 on the agenda, and it's an application to consider an extension to the waste storage yard at John Brook Sawmill. I move the recommendations are set out in the report. Can the recommendations be seconded?
I formally second and reserve the right to speak, Chair.
Thank you. I invite Joel Marshall, Principal Planning Officer, to present the report and any further additional information relevant to the application.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning. This application is seeking retrospective planning permission for an expanded waste wood and green waste storage area at the site known as the John Brook Sawmills. The site is situated beside the A46, south of the Widmerpool junction with the A606. The surrounding area is largely rural in character, predominantly pasture-based farming with some energy cropping. The site is screened from the A46 by trees, with further trees and hedgerows around the other boundaries. Fareham Brook passes along the eastern side boundary. Beyond that is the Network Rail test track. The land levels surrounding the area rise generally to the northeast towards Hickling pastures. The nearest residential property is the Grade 2 listed Broughton Grange farmhouse, which is 250 metres to the southwest. Today, the sawmills operate as a large-scale waste wood and green waste recycling and composting facility, and it includes a large biomass energy from waste plant. The existing authorised facility covers around 5 hectares, and it incorporates the biomass plant, several processing buildings, and external storage and processing yards. As summarised in the report, there's been several developments granted planning permission over the years, as set out in the planning history, and I think the most significant one being the biomass power plant. We've got an aerial photo here from a couple of years ago, which gives you a general idea of the scale of the facility. The biomass plant on the right-hand side and shredding areas in the middle. The waste stockpiles have been reduced significantly lay the extended storage area. This is an up-to-date aerial view of the site, including showing the application area with waste on there. And then within the site itself, we've got a few shots just to show you of the extension area, panning around. Okay, so the application seeks to justify the expansion of the site on the basis that the additional waste storage area would allow for seasonal fluctuations in the throughput of the site, and also to enable better management of the stockpiles, and also to assist with health and safety on the site as well. It is proposed that the storage of waste would be no higher than 8 metres. No processing would take place within the extended area. The overall throughput of waste at the facility would also not change, and there would be no other changes to matters such as the hours of operation. The initial consultation on the planning application was undertaken in June and July 2022, which raised several issues. Some of these have not been resolved and cannot be resolved without the cooperation and assistance from the applicant in providing the planning authority with further information. Officers consider that this application should now be brought to committee for determination, given the significant length of time that has since passed. Against the backdrop of the policies within the Waste Core strategy, the applicant's claimed need for the site extension is considered to be insufficient to justify a further and cumulative expansion of the facility and its encroachment into the open countryside. There are significant areas of existing storage space within the facility, and the management of stockpiles has been recently improved by reducing the volumes on the site and creating fire breaks. As overall throughput of the facility would be unchanged, there would also be no additional contribution to growing the recycling and the composting sector, no additional employment opportunities, although the existing operations and employment would be maintained. The addition of the open storage of waste materials also does not conserve the intrinsic beauty of the countryside, and goes beyond the scale of appropriate developments in such locations as envisaged by Policy 22 of the Rushcliffe Local Plan. Although the site extension is directly adjacent and lateral to the existing facility, the visual presence and the sprawl of the wider facility would increase in local views, including from nearby public footpaths and elevated areas at Hickling pastures. The proposed stockpile heights at 8 metres are considered to be too high, although this could be lowered by planning condition. There are unlikely to be further impacts to the setting of significance of the Broughton Grange listed building due to the tree screen, and impacts of noise to the receptor are also not expected to be unacceptable. No ecological appraisal has been undertaken. It is assumed, therefore, that the site has involved a further loss of semi-improved grassland, which is a local priority habitat. There's no obvious means of mitigating or compensating for that loss. Dust concerns have been raised, including from neighbouring Hickling Parish Council and also noted by the Environment Agency. The pre-existing dust emissions on this site are an issue, and the neighbouring, and to neighbouring land and farms, and the further external storage of waste wood would not be conducive to the efforts being applied to control that dust. A response from the operator is needed on that issue. There's also a lack of information on the ground conditions and whether there was any possible contamination within the soils that were stripped. And again, a response from the operator is needed on that issue. Whilst the site area just avoids the high flood risk area to the east of the site associated with the Fareham Brook, there is inadequate information within the application regarding the proposed site drainage arrangements. In particular, it's wholly unclear whether the storage area is secured with any underlying impermeable membrane as claimed in the application, and where surface waters would be directed to. Also to note that the type of granular surfacing that has been laid, as opposed to concrete that is used on the pre-existing facilities, is liable to more wear and damage over time, and to the drainage arrangements, if there are any. The County Council's flood risk team have also requested a surface water drainage scheme. It's considered necessary to have that information up front to determine the application, given the retrospective nature of the application. So related to this issue is a concern for a potential pathway for pollution to the nearby Fareham Brook, particularly from the storage of any green waste on the proposed extension of the site. The Environment Agency have been consulted. Their advice is noted. However, their response appears to deal predominantly with the waste wood element of the site, not green waste. Whilst the operator would need to apply to the Environment Agency to bring the extended area into the environmental permit that covers the facility, we feel that relevant and proportionate information is required also to inform the current planning decision on the drainage and the surfacing, and as to whether that would then be environmentally acceptable and of satisfactory design and quality. So in the overall planning balance, there needs to be a more convincing need and justification for the proposed site extension in order to allow this further development into the open countryside. The supporting information is considered to be inadequate, and the applicant has not addressed the number of issues that have been raised multiple times without reply. The application proposal is therefore considered to be contrary to planning policy and is recommended for refusal. The reasons are set out in Appendix 1 of the report. If members do resolve to refuse planning permission, officers are also seeking authorisation to commence any appropriate enforcement action as may be considered expedient in order to remove the breach of planning control. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Joel. The applicant has asked to address the committee in relation to this application. I will remind the representative that they may speak up to a maximum of 3 minutes, and will be advised when 1 minute is available time remains. When the time limit has been reached, the speaker will be asked to stop immediately. Speakers should not introduce any new material beyond that submitted already as part of the application or raised by officers as further relevant information in the presentation of the report. I now invite Sally Brooke to speak on behalf of the applicant Waring Waste Limited, Mr. John Brooke.
Sorry, my name's Emma Brooke. I'm Emma Brooke, John's daughter. The officer report on our application says that we have not fully explained the benefits of the proposal, so please let me provide some details on that now. We have made the case that the benefits to our company were driven by health and safety. My brother was killed on site in 2019 and he was run over by a loading shovel. We have extensive inspections from health and safety executives since then. We have put into place a comprehensive traffic management plan to separate wagons, plant machinery and pedestrians. This requires great space to provide this separation. The yard extension fulfills this need and is compliant with our new traffic management plan so that lorries can unload their wagons safely from machines or where machines are working, and the no pedestrian regulations are adhered to following the works done to comply with the HSE requirements. The extension to this site will not create any risk of new dust, as we are not processing in this area. We are not increasing the tonnages, handling, or the way to which the wood is handled. The changes processed will allow us better control to the wood stockpiles, as access will be improved around them. The extension will give us more manageable pile sizes, 4 metres high, not 8 metres, so that we can stay compliant and smaller piles will not affect the landscape of the valuable countryside. The extension will create a safer environment for fire prevention by giving us greater access around the stockpiles and minimising the size of individual stockpiles. The proposal effectively means the same amount of wood held over a larger area. This means smaller stockpiles with greater and larger fire breaks, meaning a much reduced fire risk. The change to stockpile management will also enable us to control dust from the stockpiles, making it easier to reduce by dampening them down. The Environment Agency will require variation to the environmental permit to cover the extension to the site. As part of this, we will need to proceed adjusting emissions and management plan for their approval, and we also seek council approval for planning. With this condition of permission, we have begun work on the plan and should submit it as soon as possible. The stall in the progression of the planning is down to our planning advisor leaving us. The volume of work created by my brother's HSE impending trial and litigation, that is, unfortunately this has been overlooked, and I've also been off work with health issues. We fully intend to do all our outstanding works and carry out the necessary studies to provide the council with the information that has been requested on the management surface, water, ground investigation, ecological mitigation, and on recently appointed new plan. We have recently appointed new planning advisor David.
That's 3 minutes. Sorry.
Who is currently working on this to help.
Thank you, Helen. Sorry for changing your name, but that was the notes in front of me.
I thought it was someone else going to talk. I was like, oh.
Not to worry. Do officers have any additional items they need to raise before the application is debated by committee? Joel? Michael Adams, you indicated that you wish to speak.
Thank you. I'll get the right button pressed eventually, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I think we're into the main debate now. What we were not going for clarification, just to check before I start waffling on. For brilliant. Thank you. I'm just checking before I bore you all to. Yeah. First and foremost, I'm incredibly sorry to hear about the applicant's loss. I mean, I can't imagine how awful that must be. But I think what in terms of this application, this has been type of process is something I've always been concerned about. The open countryside can be utilised or at least turned into something else without the right permissions going through, and the protection of our countryside is incredibly important. Without all the right assessments having been taken place as far as understanding what the ecological damage could be to that area, and as awaiting those things to come through, you know, it's difficult to know what damage has already been done. I never like to see retrospective planning permissions in the first place anyway. I find them a problem, because the whole point of having a planning system is that we then ensure that we go through a checklist that we've got. We check that we're meeting all the local requirements. We're making sure that we can protect the wildlife and plant life that's within the area. And with this permission not being granted, and subsequently the site being cleared, I mean, I was looking at the pictures of the piles of whatever, you know, on the actual site, and I just had a quick look at Google Maps just to look at the current from the last satellite image, which doesn't include the change. And again, you know, we don't know what was there. Now, more than likely, no longer there. So I think with all these things, I couldn't possibly not back the officer's recommendation. There's no mitigation in this. We've got to ensure that we protect our countryside. That's our job you know, as councillors, we've got to make sure that we're following the rules and regulations of the land, specifically with things as precious as this. So absolutely, I won't be changing the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Councillor Owen?
Yes, following on from that, I'm always concerned when we get retrospective planning applications, and I was going to ask the applicant why it was a retrospective application, though in part she's attempted to answer that, but the fact that they were unable to put in a planning application in time doesn't appear to have stopped them proceeding with the activity anyway, and clearly that is not acceptable as far as I am concerned. And I think it's sad in a way, because had the applicants engaged rather more closely with the county council, I do feel that a number of the issues could possibly have been resolved, and then the application have been submitted and granted approval. Unlike Councillor Adams, I don't regard that particular area of land, looking at the photograph of it, as being particularly attractive or something that one would want to die for. But beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and clearly Councillor Adams has a different idea of beauty than I do. But what concerns me in particular are the unresolved issues that should have been resolved prior to an application being submitted. And the first one, and what I consider to be perhaps the most significant, is the issue of dust. And we see in paragraph 32 that dust continues to cause problems for neighbouring businesses and residents, and there have been no improvements made at the site in relation to dust. Now, that's not acceptable. In my division a few years ago, we had the storage of gypsum. Unfortunately, that got planning permission from many, many years ago, and we had a film of dust in large number of houses in the area. It's now gone, and I'm pleased it has. So I wouldn't wish to continue to inflict dust on businesses and residents in the area. It's interesting that Rushcliffe Borough Council haven't raised any objections, despite the beauty of the countryside that we've heard about. But I think the other issue that concerns me is the contamination risks. Paragraph 55, there is the opening sentence says there is a potential. Well, there's a potential for most things, and I do feel that that is something that could have been dealt with prior to the application being submitted, that a scheme could have been put in place to ensure that there is no potential risk of contamination by appropriate methods. And I think those methods are set out in paragraph 57 on page 13. So I've read nothing in the report to make me change my mind as far as the officer recommendation is concerned, and I've heard nothing further this morning from the applicant or from officers to make me change my mind as far as the officer recommendation is concerned. And it's right and appropriate that we give authority to carry out immediate enforcement action, because there's clearly an ongoing nuisance to immediate neighbours, and I shall support the recommendations as set out on page 25.
Thank you, Councillor Owen. Anyone else? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, many of my points have been covered with regards to the appearance of the countryside, because I often travel down the A46 to Leicester for various reasons. You do go past it, and you are aware of the biomass and other buildings there, so you wouldn't call it exactly beautiful, as Councillor Owen has said. But no, I'm aware that this is obviously a retrospective. Of course, we can't let that affect us in any way. We've got the application in front of us as it is, as if it hadn't already happened. But could I ask, how did we become aware of the activities taking place in the first place? Just a query on that. And also picking up on something that the applicant mentioned with regards to the height of the bunds. The report refers to up to 8 metres high, which is the application in front of us, which we've obviously got to decide today. But the applicant referred to 4 metre high bunds. So I think I just need a bit of clarification on those couple of points, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Do you wish to respond to that?
So with the extension,
I'm asking the officers to respond.
Yes, thank you. Paragraph 66, we've noted there that we found out the works had been undertaken as a result of a routine site visit in August and September 2022. So by that time, the works were substantially complete when that visit was undertaken. On the second point, the application proposes 8 metre high stockpiles of waste. We advise in the report that it is something that could be controlled to a lower height by planning condition if other matters were found to be acceptable. But 8 metres, in our view, is too high and is well above the existing height limitations that apply to the current site, which from memory are either 4 or 5 metres. So they are out of step with what's already approved and are proposed to be too high, but could be brought down by planning condition.
Thank you, John. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. And can I just jump on what Councillor Adams says? I'm sorry to hear of the circumstances that have got us here, and I appreciate that things are being laid out to try and prevent that in future. And of course, there was a process that could have been done without doing retrospective, which may have led them there rather than being here today. And doing it retrospectively, as people have said, has impacted the environment to an extent that we won't know, and also flooding. And on flooding, can I just come to that? If the recommendations which I will be supporting today to refuse this application and also give you the powers to enforce the site, as no flood risk management assessment was carried out, we don't know what impact this has had retrospectively on the flood risk. What works when we enforce it will we do to ensure that any flood risk that was created is mitigated through enforcement, please?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Adams, you want to come back?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Sam's comment for a second, just to confirm as well what the enforcement will lead to in terms of reclamation as a result of the site being put back to what it was like previously. Thank you.
Thank you. Taking the last point first, we're seeking authorisation to look at undertaking enforcement work to remove the unauthorised development, and it will require removing the surfacing and obviously the waste as well, and reinstating the soils that are retained on the site in those bunds around the outside of the area. So returning the land to a permeable field, effectively. In that respect, it should therefore not affect the flood drainage arrangements on that area. It should return to more natural state. Does that answer the second point, I hope, or could I clarify any further on that for you?
Just clarification on whether we will assess if any flood risk has been mitigated once it's been put back, if that makes sense.
I think we'd be looking, as I say, to achieve a restoration of the field and to visually monitor how that has been restored and to understand whether the drainage has changed in any way. It's difficult to categorically see that, but effectively it'd be a visual inspection of the restored land to see where water is ponding or draining to, or whether it is whether it is naturally infiltrating as natural ground should do, as opposed to ponding.
Does that clarify the point?
I think just to add as well, as part of the remediation works, I mean, the land has probably been compacted through the works that have been done. So we'd probably look to get the subsoils ripped before the topsoils are replaced, which would help with the natural drainage in there.
Councillor Calamari?
Yes. The question is, if they hadn't, it wasn't a retrospective planning permission, if they've come to us in the proper manner, and if you had to do the visit and find that they were doing it, would this plan, would they have perhaps got it through if you'd gone through the proper procedure?
So retrospective applications have to be judged on the development plan and material considerations, as with any planning application. Members in the room here have talked earlier how perhaps some of these issues would have been easier to have resolved at an earlier stage. I've noted that, and if issues had been resolved, then there would be a different planning balance to achieve. There would likely still be impact to the countryside to consider, but the balance might be different, and I wouldn't like to say where that balance would be, but it would be a decision on the facts as they stood at that point.
But just to go on there, so obviously they're running this business and they've done this, and there is a need for it somewhere along the line. So, and I should imagine when you enforce it, you'll want to get it back to the field. Would that mean that they perhaps going forward, would they perhaps put plans in again? And so is there no negotiating or way forward that we can do? I mean, it's, my feelings about retrospective planning permission, they're very clear in here. I think it's absolutely.
Can I just stop you there? Yeah. Our solicitor wants to make a point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, it's definitely obviously a useful intellectual exercise to engage with where we may or may not end up if we had information that we don't have today. What I would remind members, though, is really the question you have today is about the application you have in front of you today. So if we could just focus on that.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But I understand the need.
I stand corrected. I was just trying to find a way forward, that's all.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any other points to add, John?
Just to add, I mean, the options for the applicant here, if permission was to be refused, they would have an option of a second application, a free go effectively, or they have the option of appealing a refusal of planning permission.
Thank you for that. I think speculating about what may or may not happen is a rather dangerous place to be in planning. So I think we have to decide the application on its merits as it's presented to us today, and we have to treat it exactly as we would have treated it if it was a normal application, and without the relevant information it would have been refused at that stage if it had been an application. So I think we're really left with very little choice in the way forward, but that obviously is my personal opinion, and others may think differently, but I think the consensus so far has been to go along with the officer's recommendation. So I think we've concluded the debate, I think, unless anybody else wishes to comment. No. In that case, can I now take us to the vote? All those in favour of approving the recommendations? Anyone against? So that's unanimous. Therefore, the officer's recommendations are approved by unanimously, and therefore the application falls. Okay, we can now move on then to agenda item 6, which is the Development Management Progress Report. Over to Jonathan to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is the standard report that comes to committee detailing the applications that have been received and determined since we last brought a report to committee. Appendix B details the percentage of applications that we've determined within time, within statutory timeframes or an agreed time extension with the applicants during Q2 of the year, and you know the results are good. And then also in Appendix C, we've got the work programme of applications. At the moment, we've got one application scheduled for committee in December. Thank you.
Are there any questions or observations, anyone? Are we happy to note the report? Yeah, that concludes the business of the meeting today, and I bring the meeting to a close. Thank you for your time and participation. And can you confirm that the broadcast has now ended?